Kinshade Stories community, I'm glad you're here. What I'm about to share has not left my mind since it happened. She walked into my office on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and the first thing I noticed was that she was carrying a folder. Not a purse, not a bag, a manila folder, thick with papers held against her chest like a shield. She sat down across from me, placed it on her lap, and looked at me with the kind of stillness that you only see in people who have been rehearsing this moment for a very long time. She said she needed to tell me about her mother. I told her to take her time. She nodded slowly, opened the folder, and slid a single document across the coffee table toward me. It was a bank statement, one account, 41 years of transactions, and at the bottom of the last page, a handwritten note that simply read, "She never knew." That was the point. I looked up at her. She wasn't crying. She said, "My mother spent 40 years quietly draining every account my father ever trusted her with, and when he died 3 months ago, I found out she had been sending every dollar of it to a family none of us knew existed." I set the paper down. I did not know what to say first. Before I continue, I want to say clearly that what I share here is one person's experience. It is not a template for how families work or how betrayal always unfolds. Every relationship is layered. Every family has its own history. If something in this story touches a nerve for you personally, please consider speaking with a licensed therapist or counselor who can give you the individual support you deserve. Stories like this one are real, and they are complicated, and no YouTube video, including this one, is a substitute for professional care. Her name was Tamara. She was 44 years old, living in Akron, Ohio. She worked as a hospital administrator, the kind of job that requires you to stay calm under pressure, to manage chaos quietly, and to keep your face neutral while everything around you falls apart. She had been doing that her entire career. As it turned out, she had been doing it her entire life, too. She was married, had 2 teenage sons, and by all appearances, had what most people would describe as a stable, functional life. She came to me not because she was falling apart. She came to me, she said, because she was afraid that she wasn't feeling enough, and that terrified her more than anything else. She told me her father, Gerald, had passed away in late July. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by summer. It happened fast, the way that disease often does. She described her father as a quiet, reliable man, an electrician who had worked for the same company for 32 years. He drove the same truck for 12 years. He never raised his voice. She said growing up, she always thought her parents had a simple, steady marriage. Not romantic, not passionate, but solid. Her mother, Ruth, had been a stay-at-home parent for most of Tamara's childhood, and later worked part-time at a church office. Nothing about either of them had ever seemed complicated. After her father died, Tamara became the one who handled the estate. She was the oldest of 3 siblings. She had a younger brother, Dennis, and a younger sister, Gail. Neither of them had ever been particularly good with paperwork or finances, and Tamara, being who she was, stepped in. She said she expected it to be straightforward. Her parents had not been wealthy. There would be the house, a modest savings account, a small life insurance policy. She expected to spend a few weekends sorting through things and then move forward with grief. The first thing that confused her was the savings account. It was nearly empty. Her father had worked for over 3 decades, had lived modestly, had never taken expensive vacations or made large purchases that she could remember. She assumes there had been medical bills. She started pulling records. The bills were there, yes, but they didn't account for all of it, not even close. She went deeper. She found a second account she hadn't known about, then a third. Each one had been steadily drawn down over the course of years. The most recent withdrawals were small, $200 here, $300 there, spaced out in a pattern that looked almost designed to avoid attention. But when she added them up across 4 decades, she was looking at somewhere between $310,000 and $340,000. Gone. Quietly, methodically, consistently gone. She told me she sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours the night she figured it out. She said she kept recalculating, certain she had made an error. She hadn't. She called the bank the next morning. They confirmed the transaction history. Every transaction had been made in person with a valid signature. She knew whose signature it was. She said, "My mother went to that bank branch her whole life. They knew her by name. Nobody ever questioned it because there was nothing to question. It was her account too. She had every legal right." I asked her, "What did you do when you realized it was your mother?" She said, "I didn't do anything for 2 weeks. I just went to work, I made dinner, I helped my sons with their homework. I acted like I hadn't found it." That answer told me a great deal about Tamara. When she finally confronted her mother, she did it alone. She did not tell Dennis or Gail. She drove to her mother's house on a Saturday morning, sat down at the kitchen table where she had eaten breakfast as a child, and put the bank statements between them. She said her mother looked at the papers for a long moment. She did not look surprised. She did not cry. She did not deny it. She folded her hands in her lap, looked at Tamara, and said, "I was wondering when you would find it." Tamara said those words knocked the air out of her. She had been bracing for denial. She had been ready for her mother to have an explanation, a crisis, a debt, a secret she had been protecting Gerald from. She was not ready for calm. She was not ready for a woman who had been waiting. Her mother, Ruth, then told her the truth. And the truth was this. For over 40 years, Ruth had been sending money to a woman named Verna, who lived in another state entirely, and to Verna's children, 3 of them, and eventually to Verna's grandchildren. Tamara did not know who Verna was. She asked. Her mother said, "Verna was your father's first family. Gerald, before he had married Ruth, before Tamara was born, had been briefly married to another woman. That marriage had produced a child. Gerald left. He had sent money for a while, then stopped. He had told Ruth about it early in their relationship, in the way people sometimes confess things to appear honest before they disappear those things entirely. Ruth had never met Verna. She had never been asked to. But something in her, she told Tamara she couldn't fully explain what, had decided that the child Gerald left behind deserved to exist in the world with some kind of support. So she sent it herself, year after year, quietly, without telling Gerald, without telling anyone. Tamara sat with that for a moment and then asked the question that had been building in her throat the entire time. She asked, "Does Verna know where it came from?" Her mother said, "She knows it came from this family. She doesn't know it came from me." And that was the twist that broke Tamara open, right there at that kitchen table. Because for her entire life, she had been told, implicitly, constantly, that her family was contained, that what was hers, that her father was her father, fully and only. And now she was sitting across from her 71-year-old mother, learning that her mother had spent 40 decades quietly redistributing the family's money to a half-sibling Tamara had never been told about, in a form of reparation that no one had ever asked Ruth to make, and that Ruth had decided to carry entirely alone. Tamara said to me, "I don't even know how to be angry. I don't know who I'm angry at. My dad is dead, my mom thinks she did the right thing, and there are people out there who are part of my family who have been receiving money from my family their whole lives and don't even know my name." She went quiet. Then she said something I haven't been able to think about. She said, "The worst part is, I think what my mother did was generous. I think she was trying to fix something real. And I still feel like the ground under my entire life just disappeared." That is the paradox she walked into my office carrying in that folder. I want to tell you what I said to Tamara, because I think it matters. The first thing I explained to her was that what she was experiencing had a name, not a clinical diagnosis, a human name. It is the experience of discovering that the story you were given about your own life was incomplete, not necessarily false in the ways that hurt the most, but incomplete in ways that change the shape of everything. I told her that this kind of revelation often produces what we call a grief response. Not just grief for the information itself, but grief for the version of your history that you have to let go of. The steady, quiet marriage she thought she understood. Her image of her father as a man without a hidden chapter. Her assumption that her mother's choices had always been transparent. All of those things were now different, and losing a version of your own past, even when you gain something true in its place, is a real loss. It deserves to be grieved. Together, we looked at the complexity of what her mother had done, because it was genuinely complex. Ruth had taken money that was also Gerald's, also the family's, without disclosure or consent, and used it to fulfill what she experienced as a moral obligation to a child who had been abandoned. That is not a simple act. It contains generosity and deception in the same gesture. I told Tamara that she was allowed to hold those two things at once. She was allowed to believe her mother meant well and also to feel violated by the secrecy. Those two feelings do not cancel each other out. In therapy, we call this ambivalence, and it is one of the hardest emotional states to sit with because our minds want resolution. Our minds want to decide, was this person good or bad? Was this action right or wrong? But real life and real people very rarely cooperate with that need. We also talked about the half-sibling. There was a person, an adult by now, likely in their 40s, who existed as the result of her father's earlier life. Tamara had not reached out. She did not know if she wanted to. I reminded her that she was under no obligation to make that decision quickly or at all. That choice belonged entirely to her and to her siblings when she eventually told them. I told her that whatever she decided, it would be worth examining what she was protecting and what she was reaching for. Was she afraid of disrupting her own life further? Was she curious about who this person was? Both things could be true. Neither one made her a bad person. I explained to her that what her mother had done could also be understood through the lens of what psychologists call moral repair, the internal drive some people have to correct an injustice even when no one has asked them to, and even when the cost is entirely their own to bear. Ruth had watched a child get left behind by the man she then built her life with. She couldn't undo that. She couldn't make Gerald go back, but she could send something. That impulse, I told Tamara, is not pathological. It may have been misguided in its execution, in its secrecy, in the financial decisions it required, but the root of it was not cruelty. That matters, not because it fixes everything, but because understanding it might help Tamara eventually find a way to sit across from her mother without the conversation between them closing permanently. We talked about the siblings too. Tamara had not yet told Dennis or Gail any of this. She was carrying it alone, the same way her mother had carried the secret alone. I gently pointed that out to her. She noticed it immediately. She looked at me and said, "I became her." I told her it made sense. We often unconsciously replicate the emotional patterns of the people who raised us, especially in moments of high stress. That does not mean she had to keep doing it. That was something she could choose differently. By the end of our first session, Tamara hadn't made any decisions. She hadn't confronted her mother again. She hadn't called Dennis or Gail. She hadn't looked up Verna. She had just talked. And sometimes that is exactly what needs to happen first. What I keep coming back to when I think about Tamara is this. She came in asking why she wasn't feeling enough, and by the time she left, she understood that she was feeling everything. She had just learned so well over 44 years in her particular family to keep her face neutral while everything shifted. She wasn't numb, she was trained. There is a difference, and recognizing that difference, that was the beginning of something. I don't know yet how this story ends. She is still my patient. She is still in the middle of it, but she is not carrying that folder alone anymore. Here is what I want to ask you today, and I hope you'll take a moment to really sit with it before you answer in the comments. If you discovered that someone you loved had been secretly doing something that was simultaneously generous and deceptive, something that hurt you and helped a stranger at the same time, would you be able to hold space for both of those truths, or would you need to choose one? I think that question reveals a lot about how we were taught to handle moral complexity in our own families. I would genuinely love to hear your answers below. If this story moved you in any way, please leave a comment, give this video a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Kinshade Stories. We put our whole hearts into every case we share here, and your support means more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.